Come on then. Bring your stick. Bring your stick. That's very impressive, Banjo. You gonna come? What are you up to, Luna? You having a chew on some grass again? So, good morning, everyone. So I'm back out again. It's a wonderful opportunity every day, every morning, just kind of let my soul get into the right place. You know, I found myself this morning as I started walking, feeling very wound up from watching Question Time last night. So I just reminded myself that we need just sometimes to lean into the Lord. So this morning, anyway, I wanted to share some thoughts actually, in a kind of a slightly more positive way than sometimes we do, on the role of law in the context of grace. Paul kind of quite famously in the book of Galatians, he makes the kind of case that law is a way, when we're particularly, as he talks about, as sort of spiritual children, it's something that we kind of live under. But he makes the fantastic kind of statement along the lines of that the law becomes a tutor that leads us to Christ, leads us into the place where we recognise the need. And we often, in kind of Christian circles, we often make a strong kind of case that, you know, law is the opposite of grace. But strangely, I think it does contain grace. It's just a kind of if I put it this way, in the modern world where we've abandoned the idea of any absolutes and so on, the only way we understand moral behaviour is in terms of consequences. So, for instance, if I drink water from a single-use plastic bottle, I'm now a bad person because the long-term consequences of too many people using a single-use plastic bottle is that global warming happens and so on and so forth. And so, I'm not saying that that's wrong, but what I'm saying is it's actually very complicated to try and work things through. There's a kind of comedy series on Netflix called The Good Place, which is sort of set in a pseudo heaven. And it turns out that nobody's got there for the last 500 years. Hopefully that's not a spoiler, it's about season 4. Nobody's got there for about 500 years because life has become so complicated that everything that everybody does in the end has bad consequences. And actually, of course, that's part of the strain you see on the human psyche. When you've got to try and work things all the way through to the final kind of consequence to work out whether it's good or bad. And so there is a kind of a grace in law that says, try not to think about that, but think like this. Think about positively how you should behave. So on a day-to-day basis, it's good not to kind of kill someone. That's a rather obvious one. But, you know, then you could make the moral argument that if somebody could go back in time and kill Hitler, the sum of that would be a very good thing, because there might be 6 million people alive, 6 million who wouldn't be alive a generation later. You see the kind of the way in which that confusion kind of comes in. And so now suddenly killing someone will be a good thing. You take it kind of a slightly kind of simpler sort of terms, but you know, the things like, as I was saying, how do I use my plastic bottles? Well, it's easy to turn it into a simple rule. And so I try to recycle, just as I try when I'm walking my dogs to clear anything they do on the path off the path. I tend to be a stick and flick kind of person rather than a plastic bag. I don't see why you should wrap it in plastic and put it in a permanent landfill. So we kind of get it into the undergrowth. But I'm taking a simple idea and I'm just saying I will always try and do that. And that then becomes a law. Take a simple idea, embody it, and try and kind of live those ways. And actually we're wired, if you like, in the naivety of our youth, that we do want laws, and we may rail against them, but we want rules and we want structures. Studies into the psychology of children show that the happiest children are the ones that exist within a consistent framework. Strangely, children seem to prefer consistency to love. And they like love within a consistent framework. What they don't like is love when some days it's on, some days it's off, because they can't kind of cope with that. So there is a kind of a grace on, if you like, the psychology of the human heart that exists within a law system, and which is why, of course, and so we all hunger for them. We always want that. And in many ways, things like the phenomenon that we throw around as political correctness is actually a secular attempt to try and summarise what the consequences are of my actions and then kind of turn them into things that I just live positively by as we kind of go. And so, as I say, I think very often in the kind of Christian church, because of the place of understanding the incredible value of grace and what Jesus has done for us, we kind of typify law as being something that's anti-grace, but I don't think it is. It's just not good enough. It's not enough. See, the grace phenomena is where God actually comes in and says, so you try to live that way, but when you can't do it quite right, and sometimes when it's not appropriate, grace says, but I'll cover it. Like a parent with their children saying, I want you to live this way. But if it doesn't quite work out, because you're living that way, I'm now stepping in, and I'm kind of coming in, and I'm bringing extra energy. Because that's really at the heart of it, is where do we get the energy to live morally from? And so if we set to kind of, if you like, our set of rules becomes so, well, which is why I think, I always have to be careful when I take a slightly more kind of complex or convoluted thing and just talk straight to it. As my wife says, since my strokes, I kind of tend to ramble all over the place. I can still write reasonably with reasonable clarity, so I kind of go all over. So I'm probably rambling right now. But Paul makes the case in Galatians that so the law becomes a kind of tutor that leads us into Jesus, and that is actually, I think, is something that's very, very true as well. So there is a kind of a grace within law, because actually it takes some of the pressure off the human psyche to try and work it out the whole time. If I can embody these simple rules. And fascinatingly, moral hypocrisy is a huge phenomenon. It's not just true of religious people, it's true of all people. It's because we actually recognise morality is something that the human heart desires in others. And because it knows it desires it so much in others, it tries to present it in itself. And so there's one psychologist that kind of made the comment that said that actually we should rebrand the whole realm of social psychology and just call it the psychology of moral hypocrisy because it's so ubiquitous, even amongst religious people. But there are a class of people for whom it's not. And those are the kind of people who have really internalised the importance of the morality they say they live up to. If you just pay lip service to it, you'll abandon it as soon as nobody's looking. And Christians say, not me, but actually we self-deceive, we do, and that's part of the testing. That's not where I intended to go. I want to come back to this idea that actually here's the thing that you see, if I don't live by the grace that's embodied in the law that I'm trying to follow, if I don't draw from that grace, I won't ever kind of keep it. So we need to draw from the grace, which is why the law does become a tutor. And so what you find is that it's only when someone says, I know what I ought to be, and this is how I ought to live, but like Paul says, I know what I should do, but I still do the opposite, that it puts them into a place where they start to say, so if I can't find the energy within me to live this way, where do I find the energy? See, and again, it's one of the other misconceptions, the things we've done with grace. We've turned grace into an excuse to go on sinning, as Paul puts it. It's not. Grace is the energy from outside to live by the standards that we know and we have internalised and said these things are important. And that process isn't necessarily instantaneous in the believer. It's something that comes as we work through our relationship with the Lord, as where we bring our mistakes to him. We bring even our deliberate failures, which sometimes we've hidden from ourselves by making excuses as to why we deserve to have a little bit of slack in this area. When we start to live by that place and we find his love and his energy, we start to build up a pool of energy to live the way we're supposed to live that stops making it a burden. And it becomes easier and easier. And so we find that kind of place of grace within the law, but by reaching out, because it's led us to Jesus. I just want to take the idea, though, of the law that leads us to Christ and think about the whole of the law in the books of Moses. And obviously we've got Book of Genesis, but the law kind of proper starts in about Exodus 20, where God kind of comes to Moses, says, I'm going to give you the law. And so he says to Moses, I'm going to give you the law. And the first thing God says to him when he says, I'm going to give you the law is, so watch out for the third day, which I think is part of the Lord's sense of humour, because it's actually 3 days later he gives them the details of the law. But actually the phrase is, watch out for the third day, because the third day becomes a euphemism for the resurrection day, the day that Jesus rises again. And so if you like, all of the people of the covenant who are bonded by the law that's going to be given have actually been told to watch out for the third day when it comes, the resurrection day. Just a nice little touch. But it kind of finishes at the end of Deuteronomy, where it's gone through again, the law has gone through again. Deuteronomy chapter 34 is the last chapter of the books of Moses, the last chapter of the books of the law. And as you kind of come through it, Moses goes up the mountain and he goes up a hill and he looks out and he sees all of the promised land, but he's never going to enter the promised land. He's never going to enter into God's rest. He's always going to be in the place where he's wandering. And in that context, he's looking out, he comes back down, and then the next character that picks up the story is Joshua, the son of Nun. And Joshua, of course, which is the older form of the name Jesus. Yeshua is just Yeshua. It comes to us as Jesus because it comes through the Greek. And it's it's a bit like spelling Stephen with a PH rather than a V. There's slight variance in the spelling, but it's the same name. Joshua, the son of Nun. Now, Nun is actually it's the 14th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which is interesting because the number 14 gets associated with the Messiah as the Bible kind of rolls forward. It also can mean perpetual, as in a plant that just keeps on coming back, which is interesting because he's Joshua, the perpetual son, in that sense. He's Joshua, the son of 14, just as Matthew arranges his gospel, or his genealogy of Jesus in groups of 14. And actually Solomon takes the word Nun and makes it a messianic title, because it's the 14th letter. So suddenly, if you like, all of Moses' books have led us to a person, Joshua the son of Nun, who typologically looks like Jesus. But what's really interesting is in that same last chapter, where it talks about where that line where God's showing Moses the promised land, said you won't enter into it. and that phrase, you won't enter into it, and he's showing him, what you actually find in it is some pairs of letters. They're separated 8 characters apart. There's four sets of letters, 4 pairs of letters, 8 characters apart, so 3 sets of 8. And we actually saw if you've ever read any of the My Jesus in the Old Testament series, I think in the first book we kind of highlighted the trinity of 8s, 3 8s, that go with the word, which go with the concept of mercy and with grace, and also are actually encoded in the name Jesus Christ. But I'm not going to try and do that here. I'm just going to highlight it. So separated by 3 groups of 8 letters, we find pairs of letters, and the pairs of letters spell out together the name Jesus and the word Torah. So Jesus and Torah perfectly in step, 8 letters apart, we find through that verse. People often say, well, it's just a coincidence. Well, maybe it is, but it's a kind of an interesting one. It's sometimes fun to see these things and just to notice what's kind of going on. That somehow or other, in layer after layer, the same message is coming through, that the law is a tutor that's going to eventually lead us to Christ. The books of the Pentateuch that have started in a place, well, without law. The law has come, but we've been told to watch for the 3rd day. And then as time goes on, as we get to the end of the giving of the law, and Moses goes up the mountain, his job is now complete. He's going to hand over to Joshua, the son of 14, the perpetual son. And in that context, we find a little phrase, and we find the words Torah, law, intertwined with the name Jesus, separated 8 characters apart, just at that kind of key kind of moment. And so there's something kind of symbolic in it that really makes sense. Now, I did a kind of a live post, which I haven't actually kind of released on YouTube yet, but I did it yesterday. When I was, it was on Wednesday, when I was up in London, because I often go up and I meet with people in their workplace, because I'm a great believer in calling through work. And one of the things you find is, it's not universal, but increasingly within the world of business, places that are successful are embodying some form of law. And actually there's a great opportunity for us as believers to be in that discussion. What are the rules and laws? And because they recognise that it's good for the psychology of those that work for them, and that their businesses are not just all about kind of making the most out of every situation and squeezing what they can out of their employees, but actually they need to be good for them. And so they look to kind of bring in some form of secular law. And there's a great opportunity for us as we go in there, because there is grace that we can release through law. And if we kind of focus on it, how law isn't just about control, but it is actually about release. It's good for the psychology of the human heart to have good rules and good laws. But the trouble is, we will always fail, however loosely we hold it. And there's always that opportunity for those who take that seriously, who want to dig down and find the real grace that's perpetually there in law. It's the thing that actually leads them to their need for Jesus. If I have no standard to live by, I never fail against it. If I have a standard that I believe is good, and actually helps take the pressure off my psychology of trying to see all of the possibilities of all the successes and all of the failures, but just saying, no, but with integrity, I live to my standards. And so I find the grace in that, but I find in the failure I need help. And I need extra energy even within that situation. It becomes part of the inner dialogue that leads people to reach out and actually touch God and find a solution in Jesus. So it's been a little bit more complex this morning, and there are various other bits and pieces I could have said along the way. But perhaps my thought this morning was just that seeing that relationship between law and grace, rather than just law and death, which of course is a possibility, because it's not inevitable that people find grace through law, but it is a possibility. It's not inevitable, but it is possible. And so we want to be people who kind of somehow embody that, become part of the dialogue, and actually live by it ourselves and know its truth. So I've probably shared enough. I hope you keep on enjoying these. A big thank you again to those who are subscribing. I'm down to 14 people I now need to hit my magic 100 so I can get a nice YouTube URL. So again, if you've been thinking for the last few days, oh, maybe I could do that. You know, you never actually have to watch the YouTube channel if you're watching this. Otherwise, you wouldn't know I'm saying this. You don't ever have to. But if you can just at least subscribe, let's get to that place where I get the 100 subscribers, and we can then become a little bit more public with a public URL that people can find easily. And so if you think these kind of thoughts and for the morning and some of the other videos we do, and I would encourage you to look at them. So last night we did over an hour and a half looking at how Jesus appears in the overview of the major prophets. We mainly focused on Isaiah. Next week we'll do some of the others, but those kind of things that are being produced, if you think they're worth looking at, then please help by subscribing and sharing these videos. But until tomorrow, I'll say goodbye. I'll give you that final kind of opportunity just to kind of have some words with my dogs. Yeah, thank you for that one, Banjo. What about you, Luna? You're always a little bit more. You're a bit calmer, aren't you? Okay, no, she's going to go and beat up. Oh, look, there you go. We're going to watch a dog fight, and I'll be in trouble. And now I'm not promoting violence amongst my dogs, but it is funny when they do this every single morning. So until tomorrow, have a really good day, and I always look forward to your comments. Thanks, then. Bye.